Question: globally, how many Muslims want Sharia to be the official law in their country? By Sharia, I'm not only referring to a personal code of religious observance, but also to a legal and governmental system based on the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah. This is one of the many questions included in the Muslim Global Demographic Project. The purpose of the project is to compute global percentages and global population statistics on crucial questions about Islamic beliefs and practices as they relate to terrorism and the potential threat to Western culture. A link to the full report and the summary is shown below this video. The calculations are based on country surveys published from 2010 to 2013 by Pew Research. Taken together, these surveys cover 39 countries and involve more than 38,000 face-to-face interviews in over 80 languages and dialects. All told, the Pew surveys encompass about 1.1 billion Muslims, or 2/3 of the global Muslim population, though not every country was polled for all of the survey questions. The gray bars in the graphs which follow show the number of Muslims represented for each question. It should be noted that the Pew Research surveys cover only countries with significant and majority Muslim populations. Over 90% of the population surveyed live in countries where Muslims number 50% or more. Therefore, the United States and Western Europe are not represented in these numbers. Now back to our question. Globally, how many Muslims want Sharia to be the official law in their country? As it turns out, 69%, or 742 million Muslims, want to live under a system of Sharia. This was the highest number in the project survey questions. The upshot is that most Muslims believe that a governmental and legal system, derived in some measure from Islamic texts, is inseparable from Islam. These numbers appear to upend the widely held belief that most Muslims are moderates, assuming that a moderate is one who holds that mosque and state should be entirely separate. However, the separation of mosque and state is a Western phenomenon. Traditional Islam has always viewed mosque and state as inseparable. Underlying this widespread support for Sharia is a deeply held conviction that Sharia is divine law. 64% of Muslims, 581 million, believe that Sharia is Allah's revealed law, not just a form of law developed by men based on Allah's word. Most Muslims therefore reject the notion of a secular government, and a significant majority of Muslims who say their country's laws do not closely follow Sharia consider this a bad thing. Despite their strongly held beliefs in Sharia, only 50% of Muslims, 412 million, believe that Sharia has one interpretation. In fact, there is substantial disagreement among Muslim laity on the application of individual penalties, even those that are clearly taught in the Quran. So, who's right? Is there one interpretation of Sharia? Among Sunni Muslims, who make up 87 to 90% of the global Muslim population, there are 4 ancient schools of jurisprudence. These schools agree in about 75% of their rulings. The remaining variations are traceable to methodological differences. So in a broad historical sense, one can speak of a single interpretation of Sharia which has changed little since the early Middle Ages. But the application of Sharia varies considerably in Muslim countries today, and this diversity is reflected by the divided 50-50 survey number. To understand this split, we need to consider the history of modern Islamic states. The gradual dissolution of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century gave way to the colonization of Islamic lands by Western powers and eventually to the creation of Islamic nation-states. A number of these states have adapted Western laws and Western systems of government to one degree or another. This, then, is why Muslims cannot agree on a single interpretation of Sharia. What about non-Muslims living in Muslim countries? Should they be forced to live under Sharia? Over 31%, 274 million Muslims, believe that Sharia should apply to the non-Muslim citizens of their country, although the Pew Research Survey does not specify what aspects of Sharia might be applied to non-Muslims. Historically, non-Muslims have been subject to numerous legal restrictions in Muslim countries, some of which were intentionally humiliating. As dhimmis, they were usually required to pay an additional tax called the jizya to buy the protection and toleration of the state. They might be barred from certain occupations, especially management or government positions, which would place them over Muslims. Their testimony against Muslims was prohibited in Sharia courts. They could not build or repair churches without government permission, display their faith in public, discuss their religion with Muslims, proselytize Muslims, or insult Islam in any way. Many of these restrictions are still imposed on non-Muslims in a variety of ways, socially, if not legally, especially in the Middle East. The jizya tax, however, is no longer collected. 31% of Muslims who believe that Sharia should apply to non-Muslims apparently support such controls to one degree or another. Some Muslims may go further by insisting that many or all of the punishments and requirements prescribed by Sharia, which apply to Muslims, should also be applied to non-Muslims. For example, they may be required to abstain from alcohol or prohibited from selling it. They may also be forced to fast during Ramadan. As a result, non-Muslims living in Islamic lands such as Brunei or the Aceh province of Indonesia now find themselves subject to religious laws that were once intended only for Muslims. To sum up, 69% of Muslims, 742 million, want to live under a Sharia system of law and government. 64% of Muslims, 581 million, believe that Sharia is Allah's revealed law. Nevertheless, there is considerable disagreement over the interpretation of Sharia, and only 50%, 412 million, believe that there is one interpretation of Sharia. Finally, 31%, 274 million Muslims, want to apply Sharia in some way to non-Muslims in their country. In part 2 of this series by the Muslim Global Demographic Project, we will look at support for severe punishments under Sharia and human rights in the Muslim world as we again consider what 1 billion Muslims believe.
Please share this video series on social media if you found it useful. Click on the link below the video to read the complete report from the Muslim Global Demographic Project. Be sure to watch Through the Lens of Muhammad's Life, How the Example and Teachings of Muhammad Shaped Islam Today, an educational documentary from Kinetoscope microProductions.